Why do some people laugh at the absurd, the uncomfortable, or even at pain? Why do certain jokes make some people laugh while leaving others in total silence? Is it just humor, or a sign of how your mind actually works? Behind every laugh, there is a hidden psychological mechanism. Some types of humor reveal intelligence, others emotional defenses, and some show how we deal with the world's chaos. Stay, because what makes you laugh says much more about you than you imagine. Laughter doesn't appear by chance. It never does. Every time something strikes us as funny, the brain is resolving a contradiction, a tension, or an unexpected break in everyday logic. Humor is born exactly there. In the moment, the mind detects that something doesn't fit, but also doesn't represent a real threat. From a psychological standpoint, humor is a safe way to face the absurdity of life. We laugh when a situation breaks the rules, but does so without danger. That laughter is an internal signal. I can understand this even if it makes no sense. That is why not everyone laughs at the same things. Some find humor in what is simple and direct, while others only react when there is irony, ambiguity, or a hidden meaning. This difference is not accidental. It is deeply related to the way each mind processes information, manages discomfort, and tolerates uncertainty. Humor, in reality, functions as a psychological mirror. It reflects how we interpret the world, how we react to the unexpected, and how we protect our emotional stability. In difficult situations, laughter can become a tool for mental survival, a way to regain control when reality seems too chaotic. But here, a key question arises. If humor reveals so much about our minds, what exactly does the type of humor that makes us laugh the most say? To understand it, it is necessary to go deeper and analyze how different styles of humor activate very different psychological processes. Not all laughter is born from joy. In many cases, laughing is a way to protect oneself. From a psychological perspective, humor often functions as a defense mechanism, an emotional barrier that softens what is uncomfortable, painful, or difficult to accept. When a person uses humor to talk about sensitive topics, their mind is creating emotional distance. Laughter reduces the intensity of the psychological impact and allows one to address complex situations without feeling completely exposed. It is not an escape, but an adaptation strategy. This type of humor often appears in people who have experienced prolonged emotional tension. By joking about their own difficulties, they transform vulnerability into something manageable. Laughter becomes a silent form of control. If I can laugh at this, it doesn't dominate me. However, not all defensive humor styles are the same. Some are gentle and empathetic, while others can be ironic, sarcastic, or even dark. The difference lies in the level of emotional processing. The more elaborate the humor, the greater the mind's ability usually is to observe reality from multiple perspectives at the same time. Here, another important point arises. Humor doesn't just protect. It also reveals which emotions we are avoiding facing directly. When someone constantly laughs in serious situations, the question isn't why they are laughing, but what they are trying to cushion. Laughter, in that context, acts as a psychological filter that allows us to move forward without collapsing. But if humor can be a defense, what happens when it becomes a form of deep analysis of reality? That leads us to the next level. There is a clear difference between making jokes and understanding humor. The former can be impulsive, the latter requires perception, analysis, and a fine reading of the environment. From cognitive psychology, complex humor is closely linked to abstract intelligence. For a joke to work, the brain must identify patterns, break expectations, and connect ideas that are seemingly unrelated. All of this happens in fractions of a second. That is why people who use more subtle humor often possess a high capacity for observation. They perceive contradictions that others overlook. They detect social inconsistencies, emotional tensions, and double meanings hidden in everyday conversations. This type of humor doesn't just seek to provoke laughter. Many times it tries to point to something deeper, an uncomfortable truth, a human paradox, or a collective hypocrisy. Laughter appears as a consequence, not as the primary goal. Furthermore, intelligent humor requires emotional self-control. To joke about complex situations without losing clarity, the mind must maintain a certain internal distance. That distance allows for thought while others simply react. Here, a key point appears. People with this type of humor are not emotionally disconnected, but have learned to process reality from a higher level. Their laughter doesn't deny the world's seriousness. It translates it. And precisely because of that, not everyone feels comfortable with this style of humor, because it forces one to think. But what happens when this type of humor starts to affect the way a person relates to others? That is where the real consequences emerge. As this type of humor becomes a natural part of one's personality, something begins to change in the way one relates to others. Not in a visible way, not immediately, but constantly. People with deeper thinking often experience a silent social gap. Not because they consider themselves superior, but because they process reality at a different speed and from a different angle. While many seek light conversation, they perceive hidden layers, contradictions, and emotional nuances that they cannot always express without causing discomfort. Humor at this point becomes a filter. It serves to measure who understands and who doesn't. When a joke goes unnoticed, it doesn't generate laughter, but silence. And that silence, repeated many times, ends up marking a distance. It is not explicit rejection, but a gradual disconnection. From the outside, these people may seem reserved or even distant. In reality, they are protecting their way of seeing the world. They have learned that not all minds are willing to question, reflect, or laugh at uncomfortable truths. Here, an important paradox appears. The greater the mental depth, the more difficult superficial connection becomes. This doesn't mean total isolation. It means selection. Conversations become scarcer, but also more meaningful. The social circle shrinks, but the emotional quality increases. However, this selection has a cost. The feeling of not completely fitting into most environments can generate internal loneliness, even when surrounded by people. And then an inevitable question arises. Is intelligent humor a social strength or an emotional burden? The answer begins to reveal itself at the next level. Over time, humor stops being just a form of intellectual expression and transforms into a shield. Not a visible shield, but a psychological one. Many people with a deep analytical mind use humor to handle emotions they don't always know or want to express directly. Irony, sarcasm, or sharp observation become a safe way to release internal tension without overexposing themselves. Laughing at a difficult situation is, in many cases, a form of control. Those who understand life's complexity also understand its fragility. And when that fragility weighs heavy, humor acts as an emotional buffer. This type of humor does not deny pain. It recognizes it, observes it, and transforms it into something manageable. From the outside, it may seem like emotional coldness, but inside the opposite is happening. There is intense emotional activity, carefully contained. These people feel deeply, but have learned that showing it without filters can make them vulnerable in environments that don't know how to sustain that depth. Humor, then, serves a dual function. It protects and communicates at the same time. It protects because it avoids unnecessary emotional confrontations. It communicates because it leaves subtle clues for those who know how to listen. However, this mechanism also has limits. When used constantly as a defense, it can prevent more open connections. The fear is not of rejection, but of being misunderstood. Here, an internal conflict arises. Keep using humor as a barrier or risk a more direct expression. This tension is not easily resolved. In fact, it accompanies these people throughout much of their adult life. And there is still a key aspect to understand: how this form of humor influences identity and self-perception. When a person spends much of their life observing in silence, their identity is not built from impulsive action, but from deep understanding. It is not defined by what they do quickly, but by what they understand clearly. These people develop a very solid internal image of who they are, although they rarely feel the need to prove it. They have learned that external validation is volatile, while internal consistency is stable. However, this form of identity comes at a price. By observing others so much, they also become extremely aware of their own contradictions. They analyze themselves with the same precision with which they analyze the world. Every decision is questioned. Every emotion is reviewed. Every error is magnified. This is not born from insecurity, but from a high internal standard. They know what they could be, and that awareness is not always comfortable. In many cases, they feel they live between two versions of themselves. The one the world sees, calm, reflective, even distant, and the one that exists internally, intense, critical, full of questions without immediate answers. That is why loneliness doesn't always feel like absence. Sometimes it feels like the only space where both versions can coexist without conflict. Identity, then, is not defined by external labels, but by a carefully constructed internal narrative. A narrative that seeks not approval, but meaning. But here an inevitable question arises. What happens when that identity so carefully formed comes into contact with a world that values speed more than depth? The answer to that question marks an important turning point, and it is precisely there where the last part of the journey begins. The problem isn't that these people don't know how to coexist with the world. The problem is that the world rarely knows how to wait for them. We live in a culture that prizes speed, constant exposure, and immediate responses. An environment where thinking too much is seen as a weakness, and silence is often mistaken for a lack of courage. For those who have built their lives from deep observation, this clash is inevitable, not because they can't adapt, but because doing so would mean betraying themselves. Participating in superficial conversations is exhausting for them. Competing for attention feels empty. Faking certainties they don't feel goes against their nature. And so, little by little, they begin to withdraw, not out of rejection of the world, but out of fidelity to themselves. From the outside, this can be interpreted as isolation. From the inside, it is a form of protection. They protect their mental clarity. They protect their sensitivity. They protect their unique way of understanding reality. Over time, they discover something essential. They are not alone because they lack social skills, but because they need connections that respect their depth. They prefer a few real bonds to many superficial relationships. They prefer shared silence to empty words. And when they finally find someone who listens with the same attention they observe with, the connection is immediate, intense, and lasting. Because they don't look for quantity, they look for resonance. Solitude, then, stops being a deficiency and transforms into a stage. A necessary phase to filter, understand, and choose with awareness. The real question is no longer why they have few friends. The real question is, how many people really dare to live with this depth?